looked like almost feral animals, and it was terrible.
In 2008, a pregnant 15-year-old married an 18-year-old in a West Virginia courthouse. Her own parents signed the papers that made it legal. 18 years later, sheriff's deputies opened a door in rural Ohio and found 16 children crammed into one room about 12 feet by 12 feet. Living, the sheriff said, was worse than his livestock.
Most of our livestock was kept in better conditions than the children.
The sheriff said it out loud on camera with a face you don't forget. He said most of his livestock was kept in better conditions than those children. And you already know what I'm about to say. That wasn't a man trying to be cruel. That was a man who had just seen something so bad that his brain reached for the only comparison that made sense. 16 kids crammed into a 12 by 12 room for close to 4 years. Feces everywhere. They couldn't talk. Some couldn't even write their own name. And the attorney general later said if deputies had shown up one day later, they'd be counting bodies. Not a metaphor. An actual assessment of the timeline. Here's the thing, though. None of this started with a raid. It started in a courthouse in 2008 when a pregnant 15-year-old girl married an 18-year-old man while her own parents signed the paperwork. And that girl grew up to be Elizabeth Ciders, arrested inside that house 18 years later. You know, just like I know that when a system allows a child to be handed off as a bride, the countdown to a room full of silent children has already begun.
On March 31st, 2008, Gary Ciders Jr., who goes by Bub, and Elizabeth, whose maiden name was Russell, got married at the Mason County Courthouse in West Virginia. He was just 18 and she was 15. Now, at the time, they were both living in Gallia County, Ohio, in the same trailer park about 2 houses apart. Her parents consented to the marriage, which is the only reason a 15-year-old could legally do it. I need to get the address of her parents because that is effing crazy. So I kind of want to be a little bit fair about the era here though, because in 2008 there were actually a lot of states that let minors marry with a parent's signature. So on paper nothing really broke the law, but I mean, I was a teenager at this time and I cannot imagine getting married. Because what this actually is a 9th grade aged girl who was somehow already pregnant being just handed off to a grown man in a courthouse with the blessing of the adults who were all supposed to be protecting her. The oldest child later found in that Ohio house was born roughly 2 months after this wedding, which means Elizabeth was a very pregnant 15-year-old the day she said, "I do." She didn't date this man. She was married to him before she could even get a driver's license. A relative would later describe her home life before the marriage as bad enough that she, quote, escaped into the Ciders family, which is a haunting word choice because if the Ciders home was the escape, I genuinely do not want to know what she was running from. So here's where the family becomes a ghost.
Nobody wanted to connect those dots, but we're going to connect them right now. But before I get to that wedding, I need you to stay with me on the moment the door opened. Tuesday, June 30th, 2026, Vinton County, Ohio. Deputies show up at a house on Omar Road to serve a warrant for what officials keep calling a parallel case. And look, we'll circle back to what that means because the defense is already fighting about it. The point is they walked up looking for one thing and found 16 children aged 18 months to 18 years.
Vinton County Sheriff deputies showed up at a home on Omar Road in Hampton. Officially, they were there to serve a warrant connected to what officials called a parallel case. And I'm gonna come back to what that case was or might be in just a little bit because there's actually this fight going on about it. But what matters now is that the deputies walked up to that house for one reason and walked into something else entirely. Because inside, they found those 16 children, ages 18 months old to 18 years, boys and girls. And according to authorities, these kids had largely been confined to a single room that was only 12 by 12 feet for close to 4 years. And the conditions are the part that made hardened first responders say that they will not get over this for a long time. There was human waste, feces everywhere. It was a level of filth that Vinton County Sheriff Ryan Kane described in one line that has followed this case everywhere. 7 of the 16 children were rushed to hospitals in Columbus. 2 of them were so bad that they were flown by helicopter to trauma centers. 1 child was reported in critical condition. An investigator said some of the children couldn't speak at all. They said one of the young women, the 18-year-old, couldn't even write her own name, and that she appeared to still be developmentally a minor, which is why an 18-year-old ended up counted as a child in a child endangerment case. The Attorney General, Andy Wilson, reached for the word feral. He said that these children looked almost like feral animals. And then he said the thing that reframed this from neglect into something that had a body count attached. Wilson also said that in his judgment, if authorities had waited another 24 hours, there was a very high probability that they would have been dealing with a death or multiple deaths.
Some couldn't speak at all. One 18-year-old young woman couldn't write her own name and appeared, according to investigators, still developmentally a minor. That's why she was counted as a child in a child endangerment case. That detail broke me. I had to set the script down and just breathe. Because think about it. For 18 years, she existed inside that house, and nobody outside knew her name. Not a teacher. Not a doctor. Not a neighbor who asked the right question. And now we're told she's learning things in protective custody that she should have learned a decade ago. That girl. That silenced girl. She is the hero of this story, not because she chose to be, but because her survival is the indictment of every adult who looked away. Actually, wait. Not looked away. Couldn't be bothered to look at all. Now here's where it gets interesting.
Not a metaphor. Here's an actual assessment of the timeline. So 4 adults were arrested at the scene, and this is where the family tree gets really uncomfortable. We have Gary Ciders Sr., 73, his wife Christina Ciders, who goes by Lynn, 77, their son Gary Bub Ciders Jr., 36, and Bub's wife Elizabeth, 33. So you have the parents and the grandparents of these children all living together in a mix, all arrested together. When the county prosecutor, William Archer, was asked how these 4 related to one another, he kept it very plain. Grandma, grandpa, father, and mother. At this point, he said, that is all we know. And I want to be really precise here because this case has been sloppy in a lot of retellings, and obviously you don't want me to be. Authorities have not confirmed the parents of all 16 children. They have not confirmed that Elizabeth gave birth to every one of them. Prosecutors specifically said that this was also not a human trafficking case. Archer called it an intra-family situation, and his point was that the harm was contained inside this family and that there is no danger to the public. Now, plenty of outlets have run wild with what intra-family might imply, if you know what I mean. And look, I kind of understand why. It's sensationalist, it's gonna get views, it's gonna get clicks, but the authorities themselves haven't stated anything about incest or about who fathered whom. So when I don't know something, I'm gonna just tell you that I don't know it. And this is one of those things. What is established, though, is the number, the room, and the conditions of the kids, and who was arrested. So each of the 4 adults was charged with 16 counts of endangering children, a second-degree felony.
The 4 adults arrested at the scene were her own family. Gary Cider Sr., 73. His wife Christina, who goes by Lynn, 77. Their son Gary Bub Ciders Jr., 36. And his wife Elizabeth, 33. The grandmother, grandfather, father, and mother all living in that mix, all charged with 16 felony counts of endangering children. And as the prosecutor put it, that is all we know. He didn't confirm who fathered which child. He didn't confirm Elizabeth gave birth to every single one of them. Just 16 kids in a room of filth and 4 adults who were supposed to protect them. You don't need me to tell you what that house smelled like. The sheriff already did. And the reason for that, well, you'll see.
Because the spin on this case is a genre in and of itself. So let's start with Elizabeth's court-appointed attorney, a man named Tommy Stolley. He went and met with Elizabeth in jail, and then he came out swinging at the language everybody had been using. He pushed back hard on pure evil. His argument, in fairness, is a real one. It is early, nobody's been convicted, and everyone is presumed innocent. Fine. Okay? Fine. That is how the system is supposed to work. But then he kept talking, and it got really interesting. He said Elizabeth did not ask him when she was getting out of jail. She asked about the children. He said the older kids in the house actually had phones and access to social media, which he argues does not fit the picture of total isolation the state has painted. He said there is no evidence, in his view, that the kids were forced to stay in a 12 by 12 room, though he also acknowledged the state has not handed over its evidence yet. So he's really pushing back on a case that he hasn't even fully seen. And then he floated the defense that is going to define her whole case. Elizabeth might be a victim here too. And then he said something that I just cannot get past. He told reporters that Elizabeth has positive things to say about Gary. Positive things about the man she married at 15 and apparently spent her entire adult life having children with, in a house the sheriff compared unfavorably to a barn. Stolley said that the couple had wanted a big family, that Elizabeth told him that kids are a gift from God, and that she was, in his own words, open to that. And I believe that she did say that. And that's what makes this so bleak. Because if you were married off at 15 and never allowed a version of your life where a big family wasn't the entire assignment, of course this is the script you would recite.
Because Elizabeth's court-appointed attorney, Tommy Stolley, came out swinging. He met her in jail and then told reporters the person he met does not come across as pure evil. He said Elizabeth didn't ask when she was getting out. She asked about the children. He said the older kids had phones and social media, which he argues doesn't fit total isolation. And then he said something I genuinely cannot get past. Elizabeth had positive things to say about Gary. Positive things about the man she was married off to at 15. She told him kids are a gift from God and that she was open to a big family. Now I believe she said that. And that is exactly what makes this so dark. If you're married at 15 and your whole life becomes after pregnancy in a house the sheriff compared to a barn, of course that's the script you recite. That's not a defense. That's the evidence of how deep the damage goes. She's not contradicting the victim theory. She might be the victim theory saying it out loud. And then there's the brother,
a man named Jeremy Russell. And he started posting on Facebook, and his posts are their own weather system. Investigators have not confirmed a single thing he says, and I need you to hear that again, because this is a relative venting on social media, okay? This is not evidence, but he is a named brother speaking publicly, so it is part of the story. And Russell says he had been estranged from Elizabeth for about 15 years and had only recently reconnected with her. His central claim is that his sister was indoctrinated. He went on to describe meeting Gary Jr. a couple of months before all of this, and he was not kind about it. He said Bub shook his hand like a baby would, with super soft hands, and that in his opinion of the guy, he had never worked a day in his life. He wrote that he had thought about, quote, that night, and that he regrets not doing something, unquote. In other posts, he swung between grief and something closer to a threat, and said his father's name would go down as a disgrace, and generally, he just overall posted like a man processing a bomb going off in his family in real time. Like he was crashing out. So take all of that with a grain of salt, but the through line of what he's claiming is that his sister got pulled into something and disappeared into it for 15 years.
Elizabeth's brother Jeremy Russell started posting on Facebook like a man watching his family implode in real time. He'd been estranged for 15 years and claimed his sister was indoctrinated, pulled into something and vanished. He described meeting Bub a couple months before the arrest, said the man shook his hand like a baby, super soft hands, and that in his opinion the guy had never worked a day in his life. He wrote that he regretted not doing something. That word regretted sat in my chest like a stone, because how many people had that same thought too late? The brother is venting, not testifying. Investigators haven't confirmed a thing he says, but the through line of what he's screaming into the void rhymes with what the defense attorney is now arguing in court. Make of that what you will. Now I need to slow down here for a moment. No music. No dramatic editing. I keep coming back to that 18-year-old girl who can't write her name. She doesn't have a public face. She doesn't get a defense attorney spinning her story. She is simply evidence in a case file. But she lived 18 years in that room and somehow her heart kept beating. And now, right now, she is trying to learn things you and I take for granted. That kind of quiet strength doesn't make headlines. But it should, Because while the lawyers argue competency and the brother posts and the media chases the sensationalist angle, she is silently rebuilding an entire stolen childhood. And we owe her our outrage. We owe her more than a click. All right, let's pick back up.
His attorneys filed to have him evaluated for competency to stand trial and also for a possible not guilty by reason of insanity defense. According to that filing, during his first court appearance, Gary Sr. allegedly couldn't understand the legal process, could not identify the roles of the people in the courtroom, including his own lawyers, and could not answer basic questions about himself while holding a coherent train of thought. His attorneys say he may have a significant mental health issue that is keeping him from assisting in his own defense, and possibly kept him from understanding right and wrong at the time of the alleged crimes. A Vinton County judge signed off on the evaluation, sending him to a state forensic diagnostic center, and paused the speedy trial clock while that all plays out. So now there's an open question about whether the grandfather is even fit to be tried. And then there's a second wrinkle with him, a very modern one. Gary Sr. is no longer sitting in county jail. The prosecutor explained that he had had a fall while being transported to court and had a medical emergency, and that doctors determined that he is a serious medical condition that needed treatment that is not available locally. So keeping a seriously ill 73-year-old man in custody would have meant that the county was on the hook for all of his medical bills, which the prosecutor said could have bankrupted Vinton County. So the court granted him a recognizance bond, meaning that he was released without posting the money on the logic that the county could not afford to keep him. So if he gets out of the hospital, he's supposed to be on a GPS monitor, and the prosecutor says that he is not a threat to the public. So that means that 1 out of 4 people charged is out of jail simply because a tiny county court system couldn't afford to keep him behind bars.
Because the grandfather's legal strategy took a turn you couldn't script if you tried. Gary Sr.'s attorneys filed for a competency evaluation and a possible not guilty by reason of insanity defense. During his first court appearance, he allegedly could understand the legal process, couldn't identify the roles of the people in the courtroom, including his own lawyers, and couldn't answer basic questions about himself. A judge signed off on sending him to a state forensic diagnostic center. And then it got even stranger. Gary Sr. is no longer in jail. He had a medical emergency during transport, and doctors said he has a serious condition needing treatment not available locally. Keeping him in custody would have meant paying his medical bills, which the prosecutor said could have bankrupted Vinton County. So the court granted a recognizance bond and released him without a dime. One of the 4 people charged in a house where 16 children were found in human waste is out because a tiny county couldn't afford to keep a sick old man behind bars. That's not justice. That's a system so broken it literally prices out accountability. And just like I know that if this family had money, the math would look different. The media has gone wild with unverified claims. Some outlets report Elizabeth gave birth around 20 times and started as young as 13. Authorities have not confirmed that. The only confirmed numbers are 16 living children removed from that house plus twin girls, Bailey Lee and Faith Lee Ciders, born conjoined at 24 weeks in 2022, who died the same day. Everything else is a rumor with a bow, and I'm not handing you rumors. What I will hand you is the timeline we can prove. Married at 15, first child at 15 or 16, 16 kids by 33. That's nearly her entire adult life measured in pregnancies, but started before she was old enough to consent to most things a person consents to. Whatever a jury eventually decides about her responsibility, that timeline is its own kind of evidence. It's a slow-motion tragedy nobody wanted to see.
Investigators say that from 2008 onward, the Ciders just kind of bounced around from Pike County, Ohio, Jackson County, Ohio, and then back to Gallia County. And at one point, they left this state entirely and lived in Wisconsin. And then about 4 years ago, they landed in Vinton County in a village called Hamden that has roughly 700 people in it. And the whole time they were moving around, investigators say the family was doing something very deliberate. They were avoiding a paper trail jail. They largely did not create medical records. They did not create the ordinary government records that most families rack up without even thinking about it. The kids weren't enrolled in school, and the Attorney General put it bluntly, saying that the family was adept at keeping these children out of sight and out of the view of anybody who investigates this kind of thing. 16 children, and the systems that are built to notice and protect children simply never saw them. So just think about how much work that would take. It is genuinely easier to raise kids inside the system than outside of it. They didn't go to school. They didn't have any doctors. They didn't have any medical records. No help, no vaccines, no teachers noticing a bruise, no pediatrician counting heads. I mean, if these were all home births year after year after year, I cannot even imagine.
And now we arrive at the part nobody talks about, the systems that failed. A school could have caught this. A pediatrician could have caught this. A judge in 2008 could have looked a pregnant grader and asked more questions, but nobody did. For 18 years, this family dodged every paper trail. No medical records, no school enrollment, home births year after year. It takes work to raise kids outside the system. Intentional work. They knew exactly how to avoid detection. And the state of Ohio never once connected the dots until a random warrant for something else entirely finally cracked the door open. The Attorney General called it pure evil. And maybe it is. But evil usually needs a lot of ordinary people looking away to get this far. We all knew this. We all knew there are houses where children disappear in plain sight while the system congratulates itself on policies that don't actually reach inside a locked room.
Now, I started this video by telling you about a 15-year-old walking into a courthouse in a wedding dress. And we're gonna have to end there too, because I think that girl and the woman in the booking photo are the same unfinished sentence. The system had 100 chances to catch this. A school could have caught it, a pediatrician could have caught it. A judge in 2008 could have looked at a pregnant 15-year-old and asked some more questions. But nobody did for 18 years, until it took a random search warrant for something else entirely to finally open the right door. The Attorney General called it pure evil, and maybe it is. But evil usually needs a lot of ordinary people looking away to get this far. And that's the part that I can't stop thinking about.
So I'll leave you with the question that keeps me up. Elizabeth walked into that courthouse in a wedding dress. She was 15. She was pregnant. Her parents signed the papers. The state stamped it. Nobody stopped it. 18 years later, 16 children were pulled from a room that smelled like death. And the adults responsible are pleading not guilty, while one might walk free on a medical bond. How do we as a country keep writing the same story and acting shocked at the ending? You tell me. Because I genuinely need to hear your answer in the comments. And if developments drop, I will be right here with an update. My name is Aaron. Take care of the people in your life. I'll see you soon.